One time, about 15 years ago, a guy really didn't want to go to a city council meeting, so he wrote the story of what would happen at the city council meeting in advance and ran it in the paper, despite the fact that at the last minute, the city council meeting was canceled. 7 years later, I took a job as the city council beat reporter, and everyone wanted to tell me about it. Now, I didn't do this. It was 7 years ago. It was a completely different paper in terms of style and mojo, if you will. But yet, everyone at this city government wanted to tell the new city guy, hey, guess what your idiot colleague from the past did? The moral of this is that making ethical decisions is very important, and that if you screw it up, people will remember it for an exceptionally long time. So, here to help us wade through this interesting world is an excellent panel featuring Rob Dean, who has spent 35 years in journalism and is now the managing editor of the Santa Fe New Mexican. Felicia Fonseca is a former reporter for the Daily Lobo, now with the Associated Press in Flagstaff and covers Native American issues out there. We have Russell Contreras, an Associated Press immigration and law enforcement reporter who worked at the Albuquerque Journal before working in Boston, recently moving back to New Mexico. And finally in the corner here, Bob Trapp. He's a longtime reporter and muckraker, now the editor of the Rio Grande Sun in Espanola. And I wanted to start panel by just asking you if we could go around and talk about an ethical dilemma that you have faced in your career, what happened, and how you handled it.
In the wake of the Vietnam War, the U.S. military had an image problem. And starting with the series of wars in the Middle East, it invited press to come to battlefields and wanted to control the situation. So the military in the last 20 or 30 years has routinely offered to pay for the travel of reporters to go to fields of combat. Twice in my career, I've had such an offer and declined. The issue is a especially relevant one, and one I think is central to the journalist's role. The military's offer comes with an expectation that the story the journalist will tell is one that the military can accept, maybe even will find favorable. In my decision-making on those two offers, I decided that, and my staff of editors, it wasn't a hard decision to make, that we wanted independence, and in each case we sent a reporter or a team of journalists at our own expense to cover the story as we found it, and to make our way in the combat zone as best we could. That decision is a tough one only because of the financial implications of that. Very difficult for a small newspaper like mine in Santa Fe, or a larger newspaper even, to pay the costs of travel when somebody is offering to pick up a fair amount of that tab.
And Peter mentioned I cover a lot of Native American issues. I work in northern Arizona, and around there is the Navajo Nation, the country's largest American Indian reservation and tribe, a number of other smaller tribes. And when I first started covering this here in New Mexico, there was an expectation that if you interviewed an elder Navajo in their home, that you would have to bring them one of three things: a sack of potatoes, 6-pack of Pepsi, or tobacco. And it was sort of for an exchange of information, and as a journalist you're taught you don't pay people for interviews. You don't give them anything for information. I did it once and I never did it again. First of all, it's awkward. Walking into somebody's home saying, here's your Pepsi, and you're like, well, maybe you like Coke instead. I don't know. But it's a very awkward feeling to have to do that. And as I report on American Indian issues, there's almost an expectation that you help the elderly in any way you can. So there have been times where I've interviewed somebody in their home and they said, well, my horse doesn't have any hay, can you buy them some hay? They don't know me, but I'm at their house, they need help, and they would ask anybody who came to their house. So the way I've encountered it, and it's sort of tough, you get into arguments with people and say, you know, I really have to take a stand on this. You know, I can't let you give me that lobster and steak dinner that you're feeding all the lawmakers right now. I'm not going to take it from you. And understand I'm not trying to be offensive. I understand it's a cultural thing to give and take and to be respectful of that. But as a journalist, I need to look like I'm not favoring any of you. I need to be objective in this. And so I do get in arguments often about why I can't take something, but people ultimately understand that you're there to write objective stories. You're not there to be a social worker for anybody. And I still encounter it after 6 years of covering the Navajo Nation, I still get that.
The year is 1998. Had my first job as a daily reporter in Conroe, Texas, just north of Houston, where I'm from. One of the towns I have is a town called Cut and Shoot, Texas. 3 words. Great place. Police chief resigned and under weird circumstances. Someone's complaining about someone's 6 pet elephants they have on the lawn. The dung is smelling up the town. Perfect place. Go to city council. Hear their arguments. In the corner I see the new police chief. Really heavy, fat Hispanic police chief. Turns out is my cousin. So he calls me back, gives me all the dirt I want to know. Why the police chief resigned, what's going on with the elephants. Perfect, I think I have the source. The phone rings, he picks it up. He's told on the other line, I can hear it, we have a meeting tonight. You ready? He hangs up the phone, looks at me, and I ask him, what's going on? And he says, can I tell you something off the record? I said, sure. He goes, I'm a member of the Klan. So my first response is like, the Wu-Tang Clan? You know? I mean, like their music, man. But he says, no, I'm a member of the Klan. I'm affiliated with the Klan. That's all I'm going to say. The guy calls back and wants to know who I am, and then he calls and says, you know, you're your cousin. We want to hook you up with some sources. We want you to talk to the Grand Wizard. We have some good stories that we can tell you. In fact, we want to invite you to our compound and see how we train. And my first initial response is, look, man, I don't want to hang with you guys, just what I'm brought up. But what do I do in that situation? As I look more documents, I find that the east part of this county has been very violent, especially towards young African-American males. Some unsolved murders. So what do I do in that situation? Because not only was I told some stuff off the record, here is a family member. And of course, I try to joke and say, you know, what the hell is a Hispanic guy doing? Member of the Klan? What, you got an affirmative action policy now? What's going on? So immediately, I want to, you know, I think I'm on a big story because it turns out a number of law enforcement folks, the sheriff's department, Montgomery County and Harris County, which is in Houston, covers a very diverse area, which is 30% white, 30% black, 30% Hispanic. You have people who are affiliated or members of the Klan patrolling the larger Houston gray area. So now I have a bigger story. But what can I do? Because now I am obligated to the story, but I also have family ties to it. So immediately I tell my editor, we have a discussion, and I have to recuse myself. I cannot take part in the story because I have a family member, right? And even though I think I have the data, I think I have a good story, that connection and the ethics that you've been taught are so strong, can I be objective in the story? Now, I didn't know this guy. He was my father's first cousin. I didn't know that. It turns out he was a pathological liar. He said he was in the FBI, he busted the mob, and so forth. But I gave the information for another colleague to do. And so in that dilemma, that's what you are taught to do. When you have conflict of interest, you have to keep that in mind, because if I do the story and I never tell the reader that I'm related to this guy or how I got the information, eventually it's going to come out. Now, back then, blogs weren't as big. Blogs will be now. You will be exposed. Someone will tell you. Don't think that it's going to be hidden. Someone will tweet it out, and your credibility will be on the line. Your whole story could be defunct. Even if you have the data, the information, the documentation to prove what you are trying to tell, someone will say the smallest thing. Oh, well, you know, he's got a cousin in there who's a member of the Klan, and, you know, he wrote the story. And it's funny how he didn't include his cousin in the story, right? What is he trying to do? What is he trying to hide? We'll get into more of those examples later on as we move on.
Bob, can you top a cousin in the Klan?
I got a lot of dead drug addicts. Actually, I was thinking of discussing putting drug addicts' names, deaths, how they died, and recapping, but I wanted to go with a money issue. We're in a kind of a Mexican standoff with the school district. They will not allow us on campuses unless they approve the story first. And we said, no, first it was email us the story idea, and then the superintendent said, email us the story idea, and then we'll talk to the prospective principal, and if we think it's okay, then you can go ahead and go meet with the principal. And we said no, because immediately what she started doing was, if the kids were getting money for coats, that's a go. If there's a failure in the security system, no, you can't do that story. So we said, we're not going to do any. You're either going to allow us access or not. And it stayed that way, of course, until basketball season started. And one of the arguments the superintendent made was, you can't go on campus and take pictures of students because I know a lot of them are in the witness protection program. So you can't put their pictures in the paper. And we argued public school, public access, didn't want to hear it. Well, when basketball season started, you can take pictures at a basketball game of students, but not in the schools. So there was this double standard. And we said, no, you're going to come up with a workable, legal access policy, or we're not going to cover the schools at all. So we cover them from the school board meetings. But the schools are not getting covered at all. You don't know what the children are doing in the schools, we can't go in and cover. So their answer to that was to print their own newspaper, which was I think it was an 8-page journal supplement that started with the superintendent's resume and biography and a story about how she grew up. And then there's a story about the basketball coach and how he loves coaching basketball. One of the teachers wrote a story about how great security is in the schools and how it works and how the kids are safe. And it was just total propaganda. There was no student news in it. So they printed, well, they put this thing together in PDF form, and then they brought it to me and said, we want to put this in the paper. And so then I was met with, am I going to take money from them? Am I going to take money from the district to print this, which I hadn't even seen. I didn't know what was in it, and it really didn't matter what was in it. The fact was, I'm telling the school district that we're not going to cover school news, and they said, well, we will, and we'll pay you to do it. We'll pay you to put it in the newspaper. And so we went round and round on this in the newsroom many times. I saw it, accept it, and just, you know that you're selling out, basically. I'm taking the school district's money to do something that I should be doing. I can make the argument that they won't let me do it, but the readers aren't going to understand that. The other thing was to say, no, we won't do it. We won't print it. In which case, one of two things would happen. One, they're going to say, well, they won't even print our news. If we pay them, they won't even do it. That's how unsupportive they are. And number two, cover your ears, Rob. Number two, they would go to the New Mexican and have the New Mexican do it, and it would end up circulated in Santa Fe, which isn't going to do the school district any good. So what I decided to do was, I accepted it, and the New Mexican printed it. So I had to pay the New Mexican to print and insert it, and I had to pay the mailing costs. And I did the math and figured out how much it was. And I charged them what I would charge any inserter. And I did an editorial saying, these are our costs. I'm going to cover my costs, and anything above, oh, I'm sorry, I got to back up. They paid for it using Los Alamos National Laboratory science and math engineering grant. It was supposed to be for classrooms to do science projects and hook up with the lab by web. And you have to have actual scientists doing these projects with the kids. Well, they used that money to pay for this insert. So I can't tell them how to pay for things. That's completely out of my hand. But what I said was, anything above and beyond what my costs are, I'm just going to cover my costs, and anything above that, if you're a teacher teaching science or math, write me a 2-paragraph letter saying what project you're doing, and I'll give you $200 until the money's gone. And it was like $600 or $800. So that's how I handled that. I got beat up. I knew I was going to get beat up either way. If I turned it away, I was going to be labeled as not, you know, they won't even take my news if I pay them. And if I accepted it, I was basically being a whore. So it didn't really matter what I did, I was going to be wrong. But I think that's the toughest ethical decision I've ever had to make, and that was just a couple of months ago.
That brings up an interesting point, because it's a good example of how incredibly situational ethical dilemmas are. They're full of gray areas. And I'm wondering from the panel, if we could just think about some generic ethical dilemma you might face, how do you go about evaluating what to do about it? Who do you talk to? What books do you read? Where do you go to think about it? Do you have some particularly scenic vista you like to go consult with or something like that? Because all bets are off here. Everyone's different, it sounds like.
Go ahead. When I think of ethics, I try to look at some framework for ethical decision making, and you can be pretty commonsensible about it. If you act in good faith and you trust your judgment generally, you have the tools to get to the right decision. We happen to have a set of ethics guidelines at the New Mexican, but what I like to say is those are not rules. We don't give people a prescription on how to make ethical decisions. We create an environment for ethical decision making. In other words, we educate the brain. We don't give people a set of rules. And it's based on that essence of good judgment. It starts with what is our very first ethical obligation, and it is to inform and serve readers. So there's always a presumption that we're going to act, we're going to publish, we're going to do our job the best we can. And then we start asking what are the ethical questions that might allow us to force us to retreat from that. And then of course we want to be free of obligations to people with whom we do business, so that we can be fair and accurate and free of fear or favor. So we consult our ethical guidelines. We consult people that we know and trust. The Poynter Institute's an awfully good starting point. But mostly, we look inside who we are and what our organization is, what do we expect of our colleagues, and feel fairly confident that we can trust our instincts and usually get to the right place.
And it's not with AP, I mean, you're not just representing yourself. I mean, you're looking at an entire worldwide organization, and you want to look at what's the best decision that makes you be fair, accurate, impartial in your reporting. And I think it's really, you have to be able to have that conversation with people about, you know, can I buy you dinner? No, you can't buy me dinner. Well, why can't I buy you dinner? Well, because I know you're not trying to buy me off. I know you don't think that I'm going to write anything in your favor, but really I would feel better about myself and about representing the AP if you just let me buy my own dinner. And people have an understanding about that. And they say, really, are reporters ethical? Really? And I'm like, yeah, they are. You know, you may see some that are not, but you know, I really do try to be. And it's hard when you go out and you're at an event and you see other reporters and they're, you know, taking everything in, they're hugging their sources, you know, you can see an obvious bias and people want to follow in that pattern sometimes, but really, I mean, be individualistic, know good judgment, know that you can stand up to people, you can have a decent conversation with people, you don't have to have a shouting match with people about why you want to be ethical. You just hope that people understand why you're taking the stance that you do.
And that's, but do you really have that much of an issue when you're talking to somebody and saying, well, these are the ethics that I need to, and that person actually looks at you and starts arguing? I mean,
yeah, we have fights about, really, why can't you just let me pay for this meal? I'm like, well, you know.
And they fight you over it.
They do.
Send them my way. They can
Yeah.
find me dinner.
That's what I mean. And there's so many other reporters who I've encountered, you know, smaller papers who don't have much of a budget at all, who say, I'll take a meal from anybody anytime. And to me, it feels so wrong, even to take, you know, a drink from somebody, anything, any small thing. And we have policies that say, you know, you can accept something up to this amount, or you can give it away to charity if you get something. And then we even go as far as, you know, on social media sites, we have things that you need to do, people you can follow, you can't follow, just so you remain impartial in everything that you do.
Would you say the same for like a group situation? If you were trying to ask like a group of journalists or something to kind of pay for all the meals or something like that, you'd still just say...
I asked the waiter, can you separate my check from the rest of them? Yeah.
And there's some also cultural things, you know, we tend to, like where I was in Boston and Houston, whenever you say hi to someone, you give them, you know, a shake and you give a kiss them on the cheek, and sometimes I try to avoid that, but if it's generally accepted, just do it. And one time I was more than happy to do it when I was interviewing Shakita, and yes, I actually recorded it so I can show everybody else. One of the things that we mentioned, the biggest community you can draw from another community of journalists. It was a situation when I was at the Boston Globe, where we all got together and we were talking about how we should handle a situation. And what it was that we hired somebody, a friend of ours, who was involved in the National Association of Hispanic Journalists, who I was a chapter president in Boston at the time. And she was hired from the Miami Herald. Well, the story had broke that while she was at the Miami Herald, and she was a education reporter, she apparently developed a source with the assistant superintendent, who was feeding her all this information about the schools and why the superintendent was bad, and then he was an inside source. But somebody had filed a FOIA open records request, and it seemed like through text messages and so forth they were having an affair. So not only were they having the affair, based on the text messages, she would then write a story the next day quoting him about, you know, something about that was going on in the school district, you know, and administratively. And it was very clear that they were having this affair, and he was married and everything else. Well, it turns out this came out when she was at the Globe, and he gets named superintendent. So they were fighting with the school board, they filed all these FOIAs, lo and behold, all the text messages there. And they were very racy text messages. Stuff about when she should shave and so forth and so on. Of course, it's all over Pointer. Now, how did we get involved in this? One was we were very, you know, we promoted her, wanted to get her hired, we brought her up. I actually picked her up from the airport, dropped her right in front of the city editors up, introduced her to Marty Barron, the editor, and everything. Now I'm drawn in this because I didn't know. She not only lied to her own paper, but she lied to me. She said she was leaving the Miami Herald because she just didn't like it there. She's ready to move on. Well, it turned out she was involved, and it was getting pretty hot and heavy. She needed to get out. So we got drawn in, and one of my colleagues got drawn in, who was a former roommate. She knew all this was going on. We started getting calls from Miami Herald, from the investigative reporters, wanting us to comment about it. So now the Boston Globe reporters are asked to comment about it. It's all over the newsroom. It's dead silent. Nobody's talking because everybody's reading what's on Pointer, because the text messages are there. Especially the women who didn't like her, right? Because she was like, comes in, she's this cute tall woman, and she's pushing everybody around. And these cars come out, and of course they're like messing each other like this. So what do we do to respond? So, you know, we're all open. We put pressure on public officials to respond and ask questions when we call them and hold them accountable. Now we're in the situation, now these reporters are calling us to ask us questions. What do we know? When did we know it? You know, what does this say about the Boston Globe's own journalism ethics? Even though we're not really involved in it. We weren't for the situation. So we have to do the same thing, tell our editors, and then they send it to corporate communication. This one maybe once other time, and then she's working a story, kind of act like nothing happened. Story, and they're like, no, we're going to run this. And then she disappears. And in the end, they negotiate that she gets like 6 months of severance pay, and then, you know, leaves and doesn't talk about what happened. But now you're part of the story, and now you're representing the newspaper. But you're not a spokesperson for the newspaper. So how do you respond? So all of us did the same thing. We gathered and said, look, these are the pluses and minuses. If we go rogue and say, the hell with her, how are we going to look? And then we're drawn in, because now you're accountable because you're speaking for the newspaper.
don't know about you, but I want to follow him around. Huh? My life is tame compared to that.
Any more guidelines, rules of thumb for dealing with approaching an ethical situation?
He brings up a good point. That's difficult when you become part of the story, which is what happened with the school district. They had on the agenda that they were going to discuss media policies. So, you know, the school reporter goes to all the meetings. Well, the news editor wanted to go to hear it for himself to see what's going on. And what they did was they called him up to the podium to answer some questions. And in the course of that, one of the school board members said that the Rio Grande Sun is a terrorist organization that sets off bombs in the houses of Hispanics every Wednesday night. That's pretty close to what it said. And in the course of trying to, I think they wanted Lou to discuss, to come to some sort of an agreement, but in the course of that, one of them was all bent out of shape because I put all their pictures with their phone numbers under them in the basketball guide saying, if you want to know why your team wasn't here, call the school board members and ask them. And they said that was below the belt. And the same guy who said we were terrorists said that was really below the belt. And the guy sitting next to him said, yeah, that was below the belt. Speaking to my news editor, kind of like the time when that woman called you a pedophile because you were lurking around the elementary school. And this is in a public meeting. And, you know, the news editor said, what the F? And he said, yeah, you know what I'm talking about. That woman. And the school board president jumped in and said, I think we're digging ourselves a hole here and I think we need to move on. So he cut it off. But in the course of that, we fall into the story. And I've had several long meetings with the news editor and the reporter because every time we do a follow-up story, there's the superintendent said this, the news editor said that. The superintendent said this, the news editor said that. As you go through this 40-inch novella, it starts turning into a paragraph of the superintendent, 6 paragraphs of the news editor, a paragraph of the superintendent, you know, and it's like, guys, this isn't about us. This is about the school district's policy. It's not about us at all. We're just another media agency, and we got to get out of the story, and that's hard to do when you get dragged into it. You know, when you're standing in a public meeting and they call you a pedophile, you're in the middle of it. But you need to pull yourself out because it goes back to what Rob was saying is, well, what does the reader want? You know, does the reader want all of the news editor's defenses? Probably not. The reader wants to know, when is the coverage going to start again? Are you guys going to put on your big boy pants and act like adults and come to an agreement? Or are we going to keep calling each other names? So it always goes to what the reader wants and sometimes what the reader needs, because what the reader needs isn't always what they want, but you need to give it to them anyway if you want to better the community, which should be one of our goals.
I'm going to contradict myself from the last question. There are a lot of once or twice in a career ethical dilemmas that are incredibly complex and contextual. And then it seems like there are others, perhaps situations with restaurants and food, that are pretty basic and are something that the students here are either going to face while they work for the Chronicle or the Lobo, or are most likely going to face on their first year in a job somewhere. What's the sort of first year basic ethical situation that you might encounter in your early journalism career?
Reading emails and responding in Twitter. You should all have Twitter accounts, Facebook accounts. Keep in mind that those are public. And you can put privacy settings. Remember, it's a loaded gun. Just when you tweet something out, you can tweet out as soon as you get a job that you're at stories and follow their policy of your particular media organizations. But at that time, when you become a reporter, you can't tweet out, "My editor sucks," "The reporter next to me stinks," "This place," because all that's public, and that can be used against you. Email contact with readers too as well. Now, you may think it's a private conversation, but there's some folks who will say, look how this reporter responded. I was questioning his or her judgment, and this is the response I got. She's throwing F-bombs at me, and they'll put it on the blog. So those are things you have to consider. Then you can't play, well, that was a conversation between you and I. No, everything's public. So keep in mind that this no longer your friends just kicking it back and joking, but now you're a professional. And that's going to be used against you. Case in point, when I was at the Globe, I moved from Albuquerque to Chelsea, Mass. And my editor at the time wanted me to write a piece, why did I move to Chelsea, Mass? It was a predominantly Latino city right next to Boston, 50% Latino. And I wrote a piece, how it was great. I moved there with my dog, Tupac, and we'd sit there, we'd go get tres leches, and I wrote this piece. And I was getting all this response from former Irish residents who said the place is run by illegals and this and that. And one person, was saying very racist things. It's nothing but cockroaches, and they're breaking in your car and all this, and they signed it anonymous. So I wrote back and said, hey, I really appreciate your email, but I just want to check, if we decide to run this letter in the Globe, is it okay if I correct the spelling of anonymous? Because you misspelled it, and I don't want you to come across stupid, you know what I'm saying? They wrote back and said, you clown, and all that. And so, of course, I thought I was funny. Someone put that on a blog, right? And then my editor called me up and said, just want to let you know, this happens. They'll throw it on a blog. You did nothing wrong. You responded because they put their own email, and they show how they misspelled cockroach, and everything was an idiot. But keep in mind, especially as reporters at a media outlet here, is that people are trying to hook you, especially on coverages now that the political scene is very polarized. Everybody's looking for bias. And if you write something that they don't like and they challenge you, keep in mind that you just said, oh, was there something wrong? Please, let us know. Or pick up the phone. I always pick up the phone and not put anything in writing, because that can always be used against you, too. Just keep that in mind. So when you engage, remember that there's going to be a trail. And that trail can live on. Even if you delete the tweet or delete your Facebook post, someone will take a photo, keep it, send it out.
So some of the most common stories are around disaster, tragedy, and then grief. And you'll encounter those soon and then frequently. And it's always, I think, difficult to know that you represent the public, but you're intruding in the private lives of people at vulnerable moments. Just about a year ago, there was a infant, or a toddler, I guess, who died from abuse by his parents, the hands of his parents, and his mother and the mother's boyfriend. The boy's biological father experienced a lot of grief around this, as you could understand, and he was interested in demonstrating to the community what had happened in the home, and gave us photos of this child with a swollen and bruised face just in the hours before the child died. We made a decision not to publish that photograph. We wrote extensively about the case, followed it with a series of in-depth reports trying to give the reader a very accurate portrayal of what happened, but we chose not to use that photograph, even though there was a debate in our newsroom about using that photograph to hammer home to readers in the community the reality, the brutal reality of that news story. But we felt that in the end, to deepen somebody else's grief without a strong overriding public interest led us not to publish that photograph. But there are cases where you might make exactly the opposite decision. Again, we are representing readers. Our first obligation is to them. We make a decision whether we are doing our jobs as an exercise in power, or are we doing our jobs to empower others? And fundamentally, we have to wrestle with that in stories like that.
And something that I think you would encounter as a beginning journalist is if people call you and they try to set conditions for your stories. There was one incident in western Arizona. There was the the couple that was on Raising Sextuplets. I don't know if you guys have seen that show. They were in Lake Havasu City. That's where they had their kids. And the guy got arrested for domestic violence. He apparently was yelling at the wife and had some guns in his car, and he wanted to take the kids, and she's like, no way. So we've got to write about the story. We call the guy, leave a few messages with him, and I think we're at the point where she's asked him for divorce. So we want a comment from him. What happened that day, you know? You guys still going to do the show, whatnot. He calls me back and says, I really want to talk to the AP because it'll get everywhere. He's all, but I'm not going to answer your questions unless you print this poem that I wrote for my wife. He's like, she's going to love it. She's going to start bawling like once she reads it. And I'm like, I can print portions of the poem if you think that that serves as a comment about how you feel about her in the situation right now. I said, but no, I'm not going to serve as your platform to put this out to the whole world. And he refused to answer any of the questions that I had, any basic questions that I had, unless I would print this poem, unless I would send this poem out on the wire. And I said, no way, I'm not doing it. And it can be other smaller things too. If you have candidates for election that's going to come up this year, and they say, well, I want you to email me a list of questions, but you want to be fair with all the candidates. If you want a phone interview with all the candidates, tell the other one, no, I'm not going to email them to you, because I feel that's going to give you an opportunity to really develop your questions, fix your grammar and all this before I want you on the spot, just like I'm expecting with the rest of the candidates. So if people try to tell you, you know, this is how I want it done, you say, no, you know, this is the way we do it at the paper, and this is the way I would like it to go.
Any other first year?
Actually, I do.
My first answer, real quick, before Russell even started, was naming names. I think that's the toughest part. You're going to come into that right away, is naming names in whatever situation. And Rob brought me back to the drug overdose problem. New Mexico has the highest drug overdose death rate in the country, and Rio Arriba County has the highest rate in the state. So we, since 1999, have had the highest drug overdose death rate in the country for 12 years now. And every drug overdose death that we can find, people have gotten very creative in getting either cleaning up the scene and taking the needles and the spoons out and getting the cop to say they may have, but they probably died from a heart attack, or it might have been a stroke, and then we have to wait 2 months for the OMI to actually say, yes, he had these drugs in his system and that's how he died. But when you name those names, it's exactly what Rob was saying. You're inflaming and lengthening someone's grief. That there's a family, there's an extended family with every drug overdose. And 90% of the time, when we run 5-paragraph story saying Joe Blow was found dead with drug paraphernalia, police suspect a drug overdose, OMI results are pending, that we get a call 90% of the time. My son did not do drugs. My daughter did not do drugs. That's completely wrong. I'm going to sue you. And we always say, we didn't say they did. We said that police suspected they did, and because they found a needle in the bathroom with your son. That's why the cops said that. So you go through that with everyone, naming these people, and then at the end of the year, and this goes back to the other thing Rob was saying, is serving the readers. What do we want the readers to get out of this? We do a recap. We get all of the blood results of every death in Rio Arriba County and separate them for legal and illegal drug overdose deaths and run those names. And then we get blamed for bringing up my grief all over again. I told you my son didn't die of drugs back in June. Why did you run their name again in January? And we argue about that a lot. Some people don't like that we do that in the newsroom. We don't. You already ran the story. Don't do it again. Nothing is changing in Rio Arriba County as far as the attitude and the atmosphere toward drug use. It's okay to use drugs there. There are minimal repercussions, and a lot of people are dying. It's a huge drag on the medical system, because since they came up with Narcan, you have an overdose, you go into the emergency room, they hit you with this. you're back to life. And literally, I have ridden with cops where 3 hours later, somebody who almost died from a drug overdose in the emergency room is out on the streets looking for the next fix. And that's not helping, that's keeping someone alive, but to what end? So, you know, to run the names all over again, we catch the emails and the phone calls. We'll get 50 phone calls the day after we run that list. We ran it like 3 weeks ago. And we have that discussion all over again. Is this serving the community? Is it helping things, or is it just hurting the families all over again? And it goes back to naming names. When you put someone's name in the newspaper, you always have to think about somebody is attached to that. And in New Mexico, I think more so than most states in the country, it's not just one person. If you look at obits, it's like they name when somebody dies, it's like their cousins are in the obit, and their brother-in-laws, and their uncles. It's a huge extended family. And it's almost like that's their immediate family, because we get calls from uncles and sister-in-laws and from out of state. They don't even live here anymore, but they're hurt that their relative's name was in the paper, and that you not only once, but twice you said he died from a drug overdose. And those are really hard discussions and hard decisions to make. But we believe that that's the only way we're going to get the community to change its attitude, because the system's not going to help this. So naming names is the first, I think, one of the first problems that you'll run up against.
May I mention another real-world problem? One of the most common dilemmas is the request of a source to go off the record. And I would urge you to, some of the greatest stories in the history of journalism were based on anonymous sources. And therefore, we often think that our story is going to be great if we allow a source to go off the record and we really get the dirt. And just to encourage you to go off the record as little as possible. Most stories don't demand that.
What can you tell me on the record? That's what I tell them.
That's a good technique.
Well, what can you tell me on the record?
Or clearly you want to specify what off the record means. You know, is it unnamed? Is the information available to me? Or are you just giving it to me in background strictly? Those, you want to be completely clear on what that means, but be reluctant to go off the record.
If a source said that and you said, what does off the record mean? And they said, just, you can't print my name, would you put that in the story as like a separate source that was anonymous? Or would you just not use that information? If you thought it would be beneficial to your story?
I am not making the argument that you don't use that information, that you can't use that technique. I would try to argue that the information will be more strongly presented if it's on the record. Yeah. But there are ways to use the information without attribution. And yeah, of course you go there, but just don't go there willingly, readily, right off the bat.
And not before you check to see if can you get that information from somebody else, from another document. If you exhausted all other means to try to get that information, and this is the only way you can do it is through citing this anonymous source.
What are your thoughts on using like social media? Because I've seen a few articles that have said they weren't available for an interview, but posted it on their Facebook page, or they tweeted about such and such, or before their death, their last social media something was this. What are your thoughts on using that kind of information?
As a corollary to that, I'm also curious if it's okay to be a Facebook friend with a source ever.
AP allows us to do so. Because there was a lot of folks who didn't want to follow Sarah Palin when she started her Facebook page, but she was breaking news there. So the AP came out with a social media guide that says you can friend or like a page, but that doesn't mean you're liking that person. And then what they suggested was that you like multiple sources. So it's not like you're following Sarah Palin, you're following the John Birch Society, you're following Mitt Romney, you're also following Barack Obama, you're following this, so that you're well in tune. So that if someone was looking to see if you're biased, to see you're following Sarah Palin, but you're also following Barack Obama, to see you're following Newt Gingrich, but you're also following Biden or Hillary Clinton or so forth. So that's not a problem. In terms of the social media thing, I think you have to be very careful. Is the Twitter account verified? A lot of times, if that's the only source and everybody says it and the family confirms it, yes, that is it, yes, of course we will. And then we use it for news gathering. One of the things that we found out in Massachusetts was that if we posted something, especially like there was a storm or a power outage, we would tweet at folks saying, you know, who's there? We would do searches. And someone would tweet out, my power's out. You know, this sucks. So in the old days, we'd have to go out to Springfield, Mass, 3 hours away or something and go find out folks. But then you just tweet at them and say, hey, I'm the AP, your power's out, would you like to talk? Because even though their power's out, they can call you on their cell, you call them, you have the old-fashioned. So the social media outlet is just a means to start the communication and the conversation. Same thing happened when the volcano exploded. Remember the Icelandic volcano? We were trying to think of a local angle in Boston. Well, we had the Boston Marathon. So I tweeted out and said, stuck, airport, London, and then I found this British bloke who was stuck in London, and then he said, I'm so disappointed, I'm going to the Boston Marathon. So I tweeted at him, he tweeted back, he called me. I reported his conversation. We got that little audio quote. It was all over the radio where he's like, I'm so, you know, I'm absolutely gutted. And then it was perfect. And it was all introduction to social media, but we use that as an introduction to have the conversation in a traditional outlet.
Yeah, I've read an article in, I think it's like college newspaper or something, and it said, so-and-so was unavailable for an interview, but on their Facebook page, their status was, and they quoted the status that of course at the time, I just happened to be friends with the person, so I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I saw that. But if they weren't available for an interview, who are you? Why are you posting on their Facebook page or using stuff from there when obviously they didn't want to talk to you?
We tend to use it only for
unavailable for an interview.
For celebrities and athletes, because they're and especially the verified.
Mm-hmm.
But other than like the non-public figures, very rarely, unless it's a tragedy. We double check on that.
It was like she was a grieving family member.
Yeah, no, we probably.
Death, and it was like, she was unavailable for an interview to talk about her sister-in-law's death, but on her Facebook page it said, it was like, that wasn't right for you to be doing that.
That brings up something that you should do no matter in what format, is never be deceptive. When you're on to scene and someone asks you to identify yourself, you identify yourself. One of the things I see a lot, and I even thought this when I went in, is that you can lie because you see it on television. People doing an undercover thing with a little hidden camera, or someone applies for a job, and television does those stints all the time. Never do that. That's part of something else. It's another genre. You go in and always identify yourself and dress the part. Good example in Boston. There was a murder, horrendous murder, where for whatever reason a brother went crazy, killed his 16, 17-year-old sister, and was stabbed his other sister, and was beheading his 4-year-old sister when the cops came in and shot him. So they were Haitian family, so they have a funeral with all 3 bodies, including the son. And it was just a horrendous thing. All the media was there, and they have signs, no media allowed and so forth. I go in, and my editor says, try to get in. So I dress up in black, and I have the sunglasses. And the Boston Globe, this time, since it's dork, khakis, glasses, obviously a reporter. I walk in, they didn't see me, and they like, give me a pound, let me sit, they bring him into my seat. Now, if somebody had asked me, are you a reporter? I would say yes. And I had my notebook, and I just sat down and observed everything. So I was the only media person that got in access. But if anybody had asked me, are you a family member? I said no. Are you a friend? No. Who are you? Oh, I'm a reporter. They would tell me to get out. So I just sat there and observed everything. And it was the most powerful thing, because as soon as the surviving sister got up and talked, she just said, my brother wasn't a monster. I don't know what happened. And then she started crying. And she basically just looked at her mom and dad and said, I love you. And then the whole place just burst. Women got out of their seat and shaking. And It was almost like a machine where these ushers came and picked them up and carried them off. And then while they're screaming, the preacher just goes up there and grabs the mic and says, "The Lord is with you." And he starts saying all these things from the Old Testament. He's like, "You were here. He came. He is your Savior. Don't worry about it." And as they're pulling them out, the howls echo across the place, and then the door shuts and it's immediately silent. And they actually go back to what they were doing. So we have those details in there. And of course everybody else is like, "How the hell did he do it?" Right? And then of course, so he's did it because he's Hispanic, he got in there. Like, no, it's all Haitian, right? It was like, clearly, one of these things doesn't belong here. And I guess,
should you have offered up the I mean, they say no media allowed. Should
right.
you even have tried to get in the first place?
Well, if you walk in and you introduce yourself and they will ask you if you're a family member and all that, and it was very clear. They said if they ask you, you say yes. Mm-hmm. If they allow you and they bring you a seat, go do it. And that's what the editor was saying. She's like, if you get access, get in there. If don't take a chance, get out and be like everybody else.
I feel like we had a similar situation when I covered a funeral. Well, there was a funeral. There was an 8-year-old boy in St. John's, Arizona, who killed 2 people, his dad and his dad's friend. It was like youngest kid ever shot, killed 2 people, charged with first-degree murder. Tons of people. I mean, everybody in the community knew this family, so they're all at this funeral, and it's clearly marked. They have all the sheriff's deputies in front of the church, guarding the casket so that you can't even get pictures of them bringing the casket in and out. It says no media. And so we talked to the editors. They're like, yeah, don't try to go in. I mean, they're going to spot you from a mile away. They know what a reporter looks like. Somehow people could know. And so we don't go in. But afterward, I walk into the church and I see, the photo displays. So you could clearly go in and say, they showed these pictures. And then I talked to one of the nuns who was in there, and she was in the service and said, well, this is what happened in there. And so I called my editor. I said, is this right? Should I be able to report on what I see, what they have displayed, what they talked about in there? They're like, and our decision was no, because you were not invited in there. You were never supposed to be there. And I didn't quite understand it, because if you talk to somebody who was there and saw it, you should be able to report on what they saw. But for some reason in that instance, we said, no, we don't think it's right to even describe those photographs in the church.
I have a question about the story you're talking about. What about with quotes? You wouldn't have been able to quote anyone like his sister kind of making that statement or anything, right? Because then that would have been unethical.
Well, yes and no, because they had it on closed circuit television, and you could hear it outside. And you could hear it outside, but the reporters couldn't make it out. So they weren't sure because it got kind of muffled. So if you got closer, you could hear it, but you didn't know who was talking. We just hear someone saying, I love you. And so other folks, TV saying, we heard a member say, someone, I love you. And that's what they report. Well, it loses the context.
So you were able to?
We're able to. And so, I was a constant editor with the news editor in Boston, who's now the news editor on the East Desk. And she was, absolutely, go for it. So I had cover. My boss was telling me to go for it. And then people above her said, absolutely, go for it. And it's a case where you go to a scene, what her philosophy is that even if they say no media allowed, go up there and make them turn you down. So if they say no media allowed, you go up there and you walk in, you're like, hi. I'm like, who are you, reporter? And get the hell out of here. Or, maybe they'll say, you know what, we'll let the AP in. Or we'll let the Globe in. Or we'll let the Journal in. That happens at times. Always take a chance. You never know. So get turned down, as would be my suggestion. In this case, it was clearly, she ain't going to get
Yeah, no, we walked
Yeah.
up and we said, hey, can we go in? And they're like, no way. You need to stay back behind that line on the sidewalk. No way you're coming close to here.
We have about 20 minutes left, and I would love to fill it all with your questions. So if you have any, now is the time. Yes, back to this.
What do you feel about advertorials, where, especially in the technology section, where a writer will say, there's this new product out from XYZ company, and then when you read it, it's more like advertising instead of an editorial. Because most people in the public don't really know all the minutia of technology, so they're like, oh, okay. But is that pressure so big that you've got to just fill it, fill the space? That you know what I mean?
We don't accept advertorial and never will. I totally agree with you. It's fooling the reader.
Seems like a problem more common to TV stations, especially local ones, and we're all print folks up here, so.
Oh, it's a big,
No, it's a
it's a
big-
big economic problem.
Yeah.
No, it will be, it is common and will become more common, I think. We're primarily news people. That's our background. It's easy for us to say we dislike advertorial, but we don't run the news or the companies that make those decisions. And advertorial is with us. What do? You do everything in your power to identify it as what it is. I think that's the best you can do. If you're the ultimate decision maker and you say, am I the one who decides whether we go down that road of advertorial? I urge you to say no, but you almost certainly will work for people who will have a different point of view. So how do you make, you have to then work to make it the best it can possibly be.
Question over here.
Sort of along the same vein, what would you say about ethics surrounding features about businesses or columns like that are promoting a product that is like your opinion product? Like if I was writing an article, for example, about like, I don't know, skincare, and I said like, in my opinion, this is what works for me. Like what are your feelings and thoughts about ethics surrounding that sort of thing, or doing a feature on a local business? Is that just unethical?
No.
No.
So how do you prevent it from being just, I don't know. Exactly, yeah.
You have to apply the journalistic standards that you commit to.
Right.
You're going to do reporting. You're going to be straight with the reader that what your role is. If you're a columnist, you're identified as such, and you're going to tell them that you will make a judgment and express that judgment. But behind those scenes, you've got to make sure that you're not, you don't have a conflict of interest.
Right.
Conflict of interest means divided loyalty. And your loyalty has to be to the reader, to your employer, to its standards. And so you have to avoid any gift that might be associated with or offered in the case, so that you can make sure that you're making a judgment based on your fairest assessment. Not objective. We don't apply a standard of objectivity as if we're not thinking, breathing human beings. We're products of our experience, but we do commit to fairness.
I think it's what you're asking. We're going to do a business section on business in the valley and why it's all gone to hell. And there's like 3 businesses in the entire valley that can say they've been there longer than 50 years. So we're going to go talk to those business owners. What have you done to stay in business? What's your secret? Who runs the company? How do you run the company? Can you share this with someone else to help them? That business may buy an ad in the special section. The reader will know, reading the story, why we're talking to that person.
Right.
And it's because they've been there a long time and they're a successful business person, and that's the theme of that part of the section. Their ad has nothing to do with it. I also used to run a column, there was a national column sent out by a chain drugstore, and the local pharmacist put his ad below it. Is that what you're talking about? Like, this is a good drug for blood pressure, but don't cross it with this one. It was kind of a fix-it column for human beings, but it was well marked. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, I'm not really sure. I've just been given like a fashion and style column, and so I know that within that I'm going to be going to like local businesses about, what the new styles are, etc., where you can find them. But I don't want it to ever appear as if like
you're promoting their business.
Exactly. And if I were writing a feature about like such and such bookstore that's having a reading, I would at the bottom say like Bookworks, yada yada yada, Rio Grande Boulevard. But is that a conflict of interest? If it's a business that is not necessarily having like an event that I'm promoting. Does that make sense?
I would, in that case, I would find it someone independent of the business that uses the product.
Okay.
So say like a new skincare product that they're promoting, and they've talked to you and they're pushing it. You talk to the the people who run the business, and they think it's the greatest thing that they've invented ever, and this will change literally the face of New Mexican folks. You can talk to someone who's used it, who's bought it, who is not associated with the business. Say, yeah, I've used it for a year, and got it. This is my reaction. So now you're reporting.
Right.
So you've said what they said, and then maybe you could find someone who says, that's hogwash. It doesn't work, right? So then you could say it's mixed. So now you've done your job as a reporter, and to get that, and then you can say your column, and you can actually do a review of it and say, after a year or a week of using this is what I've experienced. Right? So now you've done it. So now, because that's what people do. The readers are looking for trust. Can they trust you with your words and what you're reporting?
And in context, if they say, this is new, I'm the first one to develop this, go out and see, have other businesses tried this? Is there something else? Are they really just tooting their own horn, or is it, just the latest in this product that people are trying to sell? And so that you're not just talking about that company the entire time.
Sure.
Or if they're business analysts who can give you a perspective on that. And they can tell you, well, how does this one stack up to this other business who does the same kind of product marketing? And
I just want to talk about the other side of that coin. At some point, you're going to say somebody's product is bad, it's too expensive, shouldn't buy it. You're going to face a lot of arm twisting then. And it will be your fair, impartial, consumer-oriented reporting across the board that will save you then, too.
Restaurant reviews. I'm envious of Rob that he can do that. We've got like 6 restaurants, and you don't dare go in there and tell everyone that food is awful. But Rob's got 400 to 300 restaurants, so he can get around. But there's a whole other ethical dilemma of paying for the food, and are you qualified to judge a restaurant? Who are you sending in there to do that? You may say the food's great, and I'll say it's awful. Who's right?
Well, and kind of along the line of a restaurant review or something like that, if you did that and you gave it a favorable review, and then the restaurant contacted you and they're like, oh, thank you for doing this, we'll give you a free meal or something, is that, even though it's after the fact of writing it, that's still unethical, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Do not accept that. Say, thank you.
In the back.
So you mentioned the image of the child. Some huge iconic images like Lee Harvey Oswald getting shot, the North Vietnamese officer shooting the Viet Cong officer. Are we no longer in that era where we can't show those kind of images? Are we? You know what I mean? Because those are huge images, but it doesn't seem like we ever see things like that again. Like whether it's the government like not wanting to show caskets coming back from Iraq, or is it people getting nervous? Is this like a higher up the food chain kind of question, or?
That's corporations owning newspapers. That's exactly what that is, and it's the scourge of journalism business in this country. And it's no longer going to a White House press meeting. You've got to do certain things to get in there, and if you don't behave, you're out. It's just no longer reporting. I can't believe that journalists would allow the White House to no longer allow us to photograph caskets coming back from Iraq. That should have been fought tooth and nail.
Then there's the independent media, social media that's actually coming around, and that we as users are tagging whether it's relevant or not. Good example was in Iran when a young woman was killed, and it was during a protest. Somebody recorded it on a cell phone. It wasn't Al Jazeera. It wasn't one of the outlets. It went all over the place. So those images are still there. So there's ways around it. And there have been some iconic images. I mean, we ran a photo of someone getting killed, and we got backlash. The Marines attacked us. And we ended up going to speak to the father of the Marine that was killed in Iraq, because we ran the photo. And he was living in Maine. We sat down and interviewed with him, why he thought it was bad and so forth. It's actually, it's a case-by-case thing. And then, of course, you have to be suspicious of everything you see. If someone says, a good example was in Italy, when the cruiser ship crashed, one of the outlets, the state outlet in Italy, ran a photo of the boat crashing, but it was actually stolen off YouTube. And the users actually said, wait a minute, this is fake. This isn't real. This isn't, So then they had to pull in and say, oh yeah, we did it. And so, well, why did you do it? So people now are holding each other accountable. And if it's fake, it's going to come out.
If you don't mind, I'd like to make one other point about that. You've got to draw a distinction between documenting private grief and personal grief and public interest. Some of the images that you talked about had such a great public interest and bigger issue involved that those still are valid. You have to, one of the dividing lines when you're making such a decision is, are you causing a single person or a handful of people deeper pain and grief, or is the overriding public interest going to govern in that case? And at my level, in a community newspaper, that personal grief doesn't trump the other. It just comes into play very often.
And carries more weight.
Yeah, it does.
And the Rocky Mountain News actually won a Pulitzer before they went out of business of documenting the folks in the military who go to families to tell them that their loved ones had died. And so they followed them, they did a slideshow. It was a beautiful multimedia slideshow where they reported the folks and then they record the reaction of the family. And then they had some photos where, you know, a woman is basically over the casket, it's an American flag, and another one with the flag over a casket, and the dog refuses to leave. He just won't leave. And so those are images that will last. And they did everything right. They talked away in it. Beautiful slideshows, beautiful image, and actually they won the Pulitzer and it became a book. So those images are still there. It's just that, you know, you just have to look for them.
More questions?
How do you all feel about passing conversations? Like if you have a personal relationship with a source, and you know you directly ask them questions from a certain interview with them, but you also have other conversations with them about the same story, and you decide to use some of the answers that they gave in the passing conversation you had with them before that actual interview. As long as you call them and let them know, hey, I'm going to use this quote from this other conversation, not the one that we had for like that exact interview, it's okay, right? It's considered still ethical, or would you consider that?
The way you described it sounds as though you handled it perfectly.
Okay. Because I was worried about that, because there's sometimes, you know, if I had a personal relationship, almost as if they were a friend outside of, you know, getting a story from them, and then you kind of quote them with something else, but you still have the same conversation, but just a little bit later, like maybe a week later. And I'm like, you know what, I like that quote better than the one that I actually got from them when we sat down together.
Yeah, I think it's making sure that you have it in the context that, I mean, if you're talking about something and, you know, it changes a week later, maybe you just have to go back and say, you know, we had this conversation, is it okay? But if you're talking to your source all the time, and the way I do it, I mean, I have just random conversations with people all the time. Sometimes it's not even for a story, but if they say something, you know, I might take notes on it, but I always make sure to tell them, like, I would like to use this for a story, and check back with them. But you don't want to get them to the point where they feel like everything I tell you is going to end up in print sometime. And I think that's what makes a lot of people kind of nervous, is that I don't want to have a conversation with her because what if I say something and then it ends up in a story and I didn't even know that she was writing a story about it. So it's trying not to be deceptive also about what you're doing. But if you have that relationship where you say like, hey, you know, you can tell me whatever and I'll always check back with you to make sure that this is okay to run in the paper.
Elise.
What about like alternative media where like people covering Occupy Wall Street where they're involved in it and obviously not objective, like
Sure.
because they're activist reporters. What do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, I covered the Occupy protest here, here in New Mexico. One of the things that, but sort of disturbing to me is one of the guys at the Alibi was reported on it, and I had followed him. He got arrested. He put himself in a position to get arrested. Well, now you obviously have a bit, which is fine. So what we did was I identified key people in the movement who were reporting, who to me had credibility, telling me this is going to go on, we're going to do this, we're going to have this protest. And those are the folks I identified and talked to. Now, since it's decentralized, you have to be know who the players are and what roles they are. And so I followed them, but everything I saw on Twitter or Facebook, I double checked when I gave them the call. There was a young man who had a hunger strike. Make sure, he's having a hunger strike, he's doing this, he's doing that, his spokespersons are saying this. So it became the story. And when the arrest happened, we actually went there and saw it. And so there were a number of us tweeting. I was tweeting, and so was Astrid Galvan at the Journal. And so we were kind of following each other. And what we found is when we're doing this, and people that are following the movement start following us, and key people become the folks you go to find out what has actually happened. So it's not just the players, but some of the reporters, the television reporters, and then some of the people dismiss. Again, the users decide who's to be credible and not. So if you have a journal reporter who's there tweeting exactly saying the police have arrived, someone's there, and someone there saying the police are beating this up, well, who are you going to listen to? The person's there and observing, or someone in part of the movement? So in that situation happens, and protests are usually very difficult because they'll come at you and say, you said there were only 200, we say there was 1,000. Well, I mean, there's no right or wrong. And so you have to follow, you have to develop that credibility, and you have to determine, why is this person tweeting and what's their overall agenda.
I'm afraid that's all the time we have, but I wanted to go around and, apart from the Poynter Institute, is there any good resource that you would recommend online or elsewhere for more information about making ethical decisions?
Well, there are many ethics policies or sets of ethics guidelines available online. Many news organizations have them, and they're easily searchable. And I think those are great touchstones. And in fact, I brought one copy that I would be happy to duplicate if any of you wanted to keep as a reference, the Santa Fe New Mexicans Guide to Ethical and Professional Conduct.
Same thing, Society of Professional Journalists, they have a good ethics code. So I don't know if the Lobo had one when I was there, but it's ever evolving. So I mean, we update, social media stuff as that becomes more popular, and you'll find that your newspapers, as certain situations come up, then you are amending that. And
can I interrupt?
Sure.
Well, there's one thing to watch for with codes of ethics, and that is that there's just it's a rule book. What I think distinguishes ours is a long section of Q&A that's meant to encourage a discussion and a debate about ethical decision making. Again, giving you a framework for ethical decision making, not a set of rules.
And I would also, if you get a chance, join IRE. That's the International, the Investigative Reporters and Editors Association, IRE.org. I go there all the time. You're dealing with some top-notch investigative journalists, and I hit them up for advice all the time, saying, how do I go about this records request? They denied it and give me this. They respond. Another is if you join or just be at least affiliated or check them out, NHJ.org, National Association of Hispanic Journalists, or NEBJ.org, National Association of Black Journalists. And they talk about different situations, especially dealing with race. Hispanic journalists, right now the key topic is legal immigration. How do you identify them? What do you do? What terms you use? What are the different style book suggestions? We follow the AP style book. And then how do you identify them? If someone says they're an illegal immigrant or they're undocumented and they're protesting and you ask for their name and they give it to you, what do? Do you say, hey, look, I'm citing your name, your age, your address? Do you know what this means? Or you just run with it and say, you should know better, right? Some folks use fake names. We don't, but some do, and say, Jessica Sanchez, quote, not her real name. Well, then why should we read you if you're making up, making up players? Why don't you just make up the governor? Governor Spock, not her real name.
Those are all good resources. I think the fact that you're all here means that you're concerned about it, that you have more than a passing thought about it. I think the two biggest resources you have are your gut and empathy. At the end of the day, you can go to all those sites and you can read all that stuff, but it's like we've all said over and over, every situation is different. And in my experience, whenever I bring more than two people into the conversation, we never leave the room with all three of us saying, yes, we should print this, no, we shouldn't. somebody's gut is saying the opposite every time. So if you think it's wrong, it's probably wrong. And if you think it's right to do it, it probably is.
Please give our panel a hand here. I saw at least one more hand out there, and I'm sure they'll be around for the lunch and the panel, so maybe you can corner them later.